Since Kevin De Bruyne has come back, Bernardo Silva hasn't been that focal point and hasn't been getting those goal contributions. I think he's a very, very much so a player that is in everyone's FPL teams, because if anyone gets injured, you know Bernardo Silva is that man to take up the reins and start scoring the goals. But ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to the Sam Redgate-Large channel. It's another day, and whilst we don't have the Premier League on, what better time than to do my team of the season halfway point? I don't know. Think of a catchy name for it. Probably whatever I put in the title. However, it is the sort of like the half-season awards. I'm not going to be doing like Gary Neville and Jamie Carragher though. I'm going to go through my team of the season so far and state who I think has been the best in each position. Of course, some of them are hotly contested. So let me know in the comments section below if you think I've got any of the following wrong, or what your team of the season would be as well. And if you are new to the channel, be sure to drop a like and smash that subscribe button as well for us. So without further ado, we'll kick this off. And as you can see on your screen right now, we have FBref, which is a very, very detailed website and tells us a lot about Premier League goalkeepers. But as you can see on your screen, it has literally every goalkeeper on here that has appeared at least once in the Premier League this season. For example, Kepa, as you can see here highlighted in yellow, he has appeared once. How are we going to decide? How are we going to decide who the keeper is? Personally, I think the best way to decide the goalkeeping stat is to look at the save percentage. So as you can see on here, this is the very, very basic stats of the goalkeepers, because otherwise you get into this world of stats that mean nothing to you really. That's the truth. They don't really mean anything. They are just numbers that are there in terms of their average Joe, and that's what I am. But I think the main one, if you look on this player goalkeeping here, I think the main one to talk about is save percentage. And as you can see, there are three goalkeepers who really stand out here: Aaron Ramsdale, Edouard Mendy and Jose Sa. And what you've got to bring in when you talk about save percentage, you've got to look at sort of how many saves they're making, save percentage, and of course clean sheets. You will make more saves. Typically, if you've played the same amount of games, you will make more saves if you face more shots, if you have a higher save percentage. So obviously that shows off who is a good goalkeeper. And as you can see, you look at the top three here. I'm not discrediting the likes of Ederson, Hugo Lloris, Alisson, who feature further down this list. It is just that they're more relied on, these goalkeepers, to have good performances and contribute well. And for me, the two players, I've said it before, Aaron Ramsdale does wind me up a little bit. I think I enjoyed it for the first couple of games, but now it's getting a little bit tedious. So hopefully dials his characteristic back a little bit. In terms of looking at the top two, Chelsea and Wolves, Jose Sa, Edouard Mendy, two of the teams with the fewest goals conceded so far this season. Edouard Mendy has, as we know, been phenomenal for Chelsea. And if I was going to dictate it with my heart and looking at the stats, I would probably go with that. But I'm actually going to go against the grain here, and I'm going to go with Jose Sa as my goalkeeper. I think he's been phenomenal, and what has been really refreshing about Wolves this season, whilst they might just grind out slow wins, they've scored 14, conceded 14, which is very, very low. But part of what has been so phenomenal has been Jose Sa's performances, and he's been absolutely fantastic for Wolves. 85.3% save ratio, and honestly phenomenal numbers that, and 4% higher than Edouard Mendy. How can you give it to anyone else other than Jose Sa? Moving on to right back and left back, we're going to do the two at the same time because why not? Makes it easier for myself. And I think these two are really, really obvious. I don't think they really need too much explaining, but in case if you need the explanation, the first one, just looking at right backs, is we're going to go with Trent Alexander-Arnold. Assist-wise, he's the top assister from all of the right-backs, which, of course, football isn't just about that, but there is so much about Trent Alexander-Arnold's game that is to be admired. In terms of shot-creating actions, he is at the top of that list in terms of every single player so far this season, and per 90, he sits in the top three as well, which is phenomenal stuff for a full-back. You'd expect attacking midfielders, Kevin De Bruyne's, these players to be at the top, which they are, but Trent Alexander-Arnold across the course of the season has created the most. And I think that is such a phenomenal part of Liverpool's game, and why Mohamed Salah on that right hand side is able to score as many goals as he does, and of course chipping in with some goals himself as well. Tackle wise, he doesn't have to make as many tackles as those players around him because he's got hard working midfielders, Van Dijk, Matip, whoever's in the centre half team. It isn't his role to do that. So to compare defensive actions would be a little bit unfair on Trent Alexander-Arnold, because specifically I think he has a different role to a lot of the players on this list. In terms of left back as well, I think there's really only one player to choose for this, and it's going to be a little bit of an easy one for you guys to guess. I'm going to go with João Cancelo. He was in the last list as well, and you could see him topping the stats with some of those as well. And I think if you look at the other players that people talk about competing with João Cancelo so far this season, you've got the likes of Andy Robertson, Ben Chilwell. So for me, it boils down to almost three players. Had Ben Chilwell featured more the form he was in, I think he would have been up there. Marcus Alonso maybe hasn't been to the same standard that Ben Chilwell has been. Andy Robertson's had a good season so far, but I think just in terms of overall play, I think João Cancelo has been better, and that switch to the left back from right back as well is obviously something that is very, very challenging. Moving on to our first centre back for today, and it is going to be Antonio Rudiger. I think Rudiger's another player like João Cancelo where I think he's nailed on in this team. He's played pretty much, I think he's played every minute for Chelsea so far this season. And in terms of shot creating actions, moving the ball forward, he's been really good as well for Chelsea. I think he's a very, very underrated performer. I think Thomas Tuchel has definitely brought the best out of him. I think the stats on the screen tell you all you need to know. Shot creating actions, 1.2 shot creating actions per 90. Progressive carries per 90, 4.57. Very, very good stats defensively, and pressures as well. Still manages to find himself in the top half of tackles. And for a man that maybe hasn't had as much defensive work to do, I think it's absolutely phenomenal stats. He obviously plays in the three at the back, so the reliance on him to make the tackles himself, it obviously isn't as high as maybe a two at the back situation. And I think what Rudiger does bring to this Chelsea team is he brings a lot of ability to move the ball forward and take the ball out, and I think he's been absolutely phenomenal at doing that so far this season, and Thomas Tuchel has really brought the best out of him. Moving on to the second centre-half spot, again, another one I think is quite hotly contested in terms of position-wise. I've put there some of the best defenders I think we've seen so far this season. Ruben Diaz, Virgil van Dijk, Gabriel for Arsenal, Aymeric Laporte, and Kurt Zouma as well, I think has had a very good season. I'm sure I've missed a couple there. My brain seems to be blanking on some of these, but looking at those players, I think those are the teams that really, if you're going to talk about centre-backs, you need to be talking about the teams that have conceded the least goals and are the highest up the league, because at the end of the day, that is their job. It is to defend well. And whilst I don't think this one is as straightforward as the Antonio Rudiger position at left centre-half, I do think there is a lot of competitiveness. And as you can see, Ruben Diaz has played the most games so far for out of anyone, with goals-wise, them all pretty much tight on 2 goals right at the top, which is pretty damn impressive actually, that they've all sort of bagged themselves 2 goals. But the important part really is defensive actions, isn't it? If we look at defensive pressures, in terms of pressures, Ruben Diaz and Gabriel bang tied at the top for that, and success-wise, again, very, very similar in terms of the success when it comes to pressures. Defensive third, Gabriel obviously miles ahead because they've had a lot more defensive play to do. Mid third, again, Gabriel finishes in second, and attacking third. Very, very similar stats for all 3 defenders. And the turnaround of Arsenal so far this season has been phenomenal. It's been credit where credit's due to Mikel Arteta. I think the turnaround has been absolutely phenomenal, and I think that is one of the important things to look at in terms of this side. And Gabriel, I think, has really been the epitome of that at the beginning of the season. Question marks around how he's played. Not now. Definitely not now. And I think a handful of these Arsenal players on different seasons would definitely have got their way in, and you know, we've got to give them some representation, because otherwise I think it's a little bit harsh. But Ruben Diaz as well, I think, has been someone who has been boiling away, doing his job just underratedly. I think all of these defenders to some degree have been underrated, whereas Gabriel has been the man that has stood out and everyone has realised, actually, is putting in a really, really fantastic shift. For this, I forgot to say, we are going to be doing a 4-3-3, and the next few I'm going to base a little bit less around just stats to move this video along a little bit. We're going to move on to the midfield three. And for the midfield three, of course, we're going to have to pick a defensive midfielder. This one, I am just going to go off what I have seen so far, and Declan Rice has to be in that team. I think he's been the most impressive so far this season, the biggest step up out of the players that we know. Rodri as well has been another player that of note to speak about, and of course you know what you're going to get from the likes of Kovacic, Jorginho and Kante, and of course, Partey as well has been very, very good. But I think Declan Rice is the man who seals it for me. Declan Rice has been absolutely phenomenal, scoring in Europa League. I know that isn't relevant to this debate, but scoring in the Europa League, goals as well. Being able to carry the ball out from defence and create attacks that way. He's turning into much more than just a defensive midfielder. But in my defensive midfield role so far, I'm going to go with Declan Rice. Moving on to the two more, I'm going to say more advanced midfield positions. And to look at this, we're going to be looking at player goal and shot creation, because that is what you want from your more advanced midfielders, is goal and shot creation. Let's have a look at shot creating actions per 90. So, as you can see, I spoke about this a little bit earlier on. Trent Alexander-Arnold stands right out at the top of this list. And then, as you can see, there are quite a few big names in among the mix of that, and Kevin De Bruyne, he's only played just over 10 games in terms of 90 minutes, and so that's why I cannot give it to them. I like to go for players who are played the most games, because data can be skewed. If you look at Pogba still on 7 assists, but he's only played 9 games, and so you might look at it and go, wow, Pogba did well in those 9 games. Yeah, he did pretty well, but 4 of those assists were in 1 game, and so that isn't justifiable to put him in the centre of midfield. And so as a result of that, I'm going to get rid of quite a few of the players that are below 10 matches, which then brings us on to the likes of Bruno Fernandes, Matthias Klick, Adama Traore, Conor Gallagher, Bukayo Saka. So I think the player that stands out to me there is Conor Gallagher. In terms of shot creating actions, Conor Gallagher sits in 5th, just behind Bruno Fernandes, Bernardo Silva as well in the mix there, and as I said, Trent Alexander-Arnold right at the top, which is pretty mental if you do ask me. Conor Gallagher, the reason I'm going with Conor Gallagher in the centre mid position is, number one, it's between him and Bruno. If you look at that, Bernardo Silva's obviously in there. Him and Bruno, the difference is that Conor Gallagher has been scoring a few goals this season. He's got those shot creating actions, and he's playing in a worse side, and he's being able to create opportunities for those in a team that are working right at their maximum right now. And I think that's the important thing to look at with Conor Gallagher. I think he's been really, really good under Patrick Vieira. He's being moulded into this phenomenal player. I can't wait to see him back in a Chelsea shirt come the end of the season when his loan eventually expires. And I think it's a really, really exciting time if you're a Crystal Palace fan, and of course for Conor Gallagher, because he's made that step up and that transition absolutely fantastically. Another sort of more flat centre mid I'm going to go with, rather than an attacking midfielder, I'm going to go with Mateo Kovacic. This one has been a little bit decided over the last few sort of weeks, but I think the step up Mateo Kovacic has done this season in terms of in a Chelsea shirt has been absolutely phenomenal. I'd like to give Bernardo Silva a really big shout out, but since Kevin De Bruyne has come back, Bernardo Silva hasn't been that focal point and hasn't been getting those goal contributions. I think he's a very, very much so a player that is in everyone's FPL teams, because if anyone gets injured, you know Bernardo Silva is that man to take up the reins and start scoring the goals. But Mateo Kovacic, for me as a midfielder, has been much improved in terms of the Chelsea side. And I said at the beginning, some of this is going to be dictated on heart and some of it's going to be dictated on the stat. I watch Mateo Kovacic week in, week out, and I see what a lot of people don't see. People see the goal against Liverpool and go, wow, what a fantastic strike. A few of the assists this season he's had, thread in the eye of a needle. Mateo Kovacic for me is someone who goes very, very much under the radar. And as you can see by his midfield stats here, in terms of tackles per 90, 3.04, which obviously for someone like Mateo Kovacic is massive, because he's alongside Jorginho. The idea is to distribute the ball to Jorginho, and then he spreads the play. I'm sure if you looked at someone like an N'Golo Kante, these are much higher. Even someone like an Allen, I'm sure these are much higher. But then you look at the midfield attack, the midfield stuff, and you look at the passes attempted, his pass completion rate, and his progressive passes and progressive carries. He is part of the reason that Chelsea are able to get the ball up the pitch that quickly, because he glides past players. And I think he's a player that, like I say, goes massively underrated. Shot creating actions 3.04, so again up there with the likes of Conor Gallagher, who you probably typically say is more attacking than Mateo Kovacic. I think he's a man who goes underrated, and I think that is why I'm going to put him in my team, because a lot of people will be talking about, even your Mason Mounts, these players who are big time players who feature in your teams all the time, your Bernardo Silvas, your Gundawans, who get a lot of the glory because they score the goals and they get the assist. But Mateo Kovacic this season has been steadily working away under the radar, chipping in with a few assists, getting those phenomenal 10.09 progressive carries. 10.09. Phenomenal numbers for a central midfielder, and therefore he goes in my midfield. Last but not least, we are going to talk about my front three, and we'll start off with the obvious one, Mohamed Salah. We don't need to talk about this for too long. He's been absolutely phenomenal. Mohamed Salah has been for the vast majority of this season. Obviously, he blanked against Leicester, but that was the first time this season that we've seen Mohamed Salah not look at his best, but he's been absolutely phenomenal. I think he's had 9 assists so far this season with 16 goals. He's miles ahead from everyone else. In terms of shots per 90, he leads that. And his expected XG, he is miles above that. His XG is 12.5 and he's miles ahead with his 16 goals. So Mohamed Salah has been efficient, proficient, and has been fantastic. He goes in at right midfield. The next player I'm actually going to go with, this might shock a few of you, but I'm going to go with Emmanuel Dennis. I've just been looking at the stats, and at first I was convinced. I was like, we're going to go Diego Jota, aren't we? We're going to have to go Diego Jota or Jamie Vardy. But I'm actually going to go with Emmanuel Dennis. And the reason I say this is, if you look at his stats on the screen here, he's played... Yes, he's not played as many minutes as the likes of Mohamed Salah, who's nearly played the full 20 games or 21 games so far this season. But in terms of the difference between him, Jota, and Jamie Vardy, there isn't too much difference. And Emmanuel Dennis isn't getting the amount of shots per 90 that the likes of Jota and Jamie Vardy are able to. He gets 2.42 shots per 90. Jamie Vardy gets 2.45. Jota on 3.41. So he's lower on that. And shots on target, though, he's still managing to somehow get ahead of them. XG-wise, Emmanuel Dennis, 4.2 XG, and he's scored 8 goals. Massively overachieving. In terms of looking at your FPL team, he looks like a really good asset. But of course, you know, at some point this will even itself out, whether it be at the end of the season where he has a bit of a blank start to the next season, or he blanks now. But it will even itself out. That tends to happen with these kinds of players. Moving on to the left wing role, and I think I'm going to go with someone kind of controversial. And I don't think it is when I say that, but I do think it is in the same breath, if you know what I mean. And you'll understand that when I say it's Emile Smith-Rowe. Emile Smith-Rowe has been absolutely fantastic so far for Arsenal this season. If you look at his actual goals, he's scored 8 goals so far this season. Who'd have thought that? At Huddersfield Town, former Huddersfield Town loanee, of course, smashing in 8 goals with an XG of 3.4. So massively overachieving in this Arteta side. And I think he's been one of the brightest sparks in the Premier League so far this season. Doesn't really get the shots that like the rest of them do. I said that Emmanuel Dennis sits on 2.42, but Emile Smith-Rowe, of course, playing off that left-hand side, gets himself 1.87, which is massively under. So he's not getting many shots per game, but when he does get the shots, doesn't he make sure to take them? He absolutely does. He's been absolutely phenomenal, and he caps off my team of the season so far. If you have enjoyed this video, guys, please do be sure to drop a like and be sure to subscribe as well to the Redgate-Large channel. There'll be plenty of streams and videos to come, and of course we've got the semi-final second leg of the Carabao Cup. Come on, Chelsea. Come on, Chelsea. We'll see you then, and most importantly, guys, stay safe. Cheers. In the combat arena, I like